Good afternoon. This is the informational webinar on the Recruitment and Retention Learning Collaborative that is being sponsored by the Woodruff Foundation. I'd like to thank Karen Thompson-Shaheen and Janine Gergel of the Foundation, who are the two individuals who've been responsible for arranging this opportunity for agencies within Cuyahoga County. My name is Michael Hoge. I am the leader for the Learning Collaborative. In terms of background, I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I graduated from Kent State University, not far from you. I am a professor of psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine and a senior science and policy advisor for the Annapolis Coalition on the behavioral health workforce, which has been focused on issues with the behavioral health workforce for the past 15 years. If by any reason for any reason you have video but can't hear the webinar, you can dial the following numbers, both the number and the access code. The purpose of this webinar today is to orient you to the nature of the collaborative and to explain to you the application process. Questions can be posed in the chat box that you should have available to you, and I will answer those towards the end of this webinar. If you have additional questions or cannot access the chat or question box on your screen, you can email questions to me directly at michael.hoge@yale.edu. Both the slides are available, and a recording of this webinar will be available, and I'll explain the locations of those resources to you shortly. Recruitment in behavioral health has long-standing been a problem for our field, but this issue seems to have reached an unprecedented crisis. Recent healthcare reforms, which are a good thing, have expanded demand and use of behavioral health services. This has led an increasing number of hospitals and health systems and for-profit companies to get into the behavioral health field or to expand their behavioral health services, creating increased demand for a workforce. We also have an enormously strong economy. There are more jobs available in the US economy than there are people on the unemployment rolls. The demand for workers is as strong as it has been over the last 20 years, and this has put increasing pressure on behavioral health agencies to find and keep their workers. We also know that it's been difficult to keep workers. This image is a depiction of what too often seems like our strategy in behavioral health, which is named after the fishing strategy called catch and release. We spend a lot of time finding, orienting, and training new workers only to have them move on to other positions, which creates a great deal of stress and decreased access to services within our behavioral health organizations. For some positions in some behavioral health organizations, turnover exceeds 100%, meaning entire turnover of a workforce in a year. And so this notion of finding and keeping workers, again, is an unprecedented challenge for us at this moment in time. So let me tell you briefly about the Learning Collaboratives. Selected organizations for this collaborative will each create a change management team. The teams will come together for a single day in Cleveland to learn about recruitment and retention best practices. We have distilled over 35 best practices in behavioral health workforce recruitment and retention. Each team will then begin to develop a recruitment and retention plan during the one-day meeting and continue those efforts to build a plan after they return to their home organizations. And along the way, each of the teams will receive technical assistance from me over the course of the project. In terms of the change management teams, each agency designates a 3-member team. Optimally, this will include the Director of Human Resources, the Director of Services, plus one individual. If you received the slides, which I tried to send to everyone last night, you may note that that the slides indicated the Director of Human Services, but is meant to be the Director of Human Resources. So we're really looking for a senior HR person, a senior service person, plus one additional individual. Occasionally, a CEO or a Chief Operating Officer will be the plus one in this array. We do ask you in your application to explain the rationale for the composition of your team if this is not your approach to assembling a team. We do recognize that organizations are all unique and there may be some rationale for assembling a team that looks somewhat different. The individuals listed in your application are expected to participate in the process if your organization is selected. So if you apply, please check their availability in advance, particularly for the one-day launch meeting, which will be held on November 20th. In terms of eligibility for this process, organizations must be a nonprofit. They must be in good standing with the various Ohio state agencies and with the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We welcome organizations of all sizes, but in general, this project is targeted towards community behavioral health organizations, large and small. It is generally not intended for governmental organizations or large health systems or hospital systems. In terms of exclusion criteria, we generally do not accept applications from multi-agency consortiums. These involve multiple agencies who simply come together under some other umbrella. The collaborative is designed for single agencies with a single sort of administrative structure to participate. We do ask if you have any major competing change initiatives going on within your organization. And if you have such initiatives, which many organizations do, we ask you to address the question of whether you have the bandwidth or the capacity to handle this initiative along with the others that are ongoing. And based on that answer, determine your eligibility to participate. With respect to selection criteria, we look first to see that applications are complete, that the organization meets the eligibility criteria. We look very carefully at whether the proposed team members are appropriate and whether the recruitment and retention needs that we ask you to document in your application are ones that the collaborative could help address. And we're looking for evidence of organizational commitment and organizational capacity to actively participate, which comes through in various answers that you might provide in the application. There is no cost to participate. This initiative is funded fully by the Woodruff Foundation. Organizations are asked to cover any travel costs for the three-member team to attend the one-day meeting. But since applicant organizations must be in Cuyahoga County, the travel implications or cost implications are very minor. The Woodruff Foundation will be providing beverages throughout the day and a lunch, and will also be covering any parking costs, should there be any. The meeting is going to be held at the Centers for Families and Children, which should be easily accessible to anyone in Cuyahoga County. So let me tell you a little bit about the Learning Collaborative process. About 2 weeks after the application deadline, we will notify organizations that have been selected. There will be a minimum of 10 organizations that will be invited to participate. The Woodruff Foundation has indicated that it may make more spots available if there is demand within the county and if they have the resources to provide increased access to this collaborative. Shortly after notification, there's a brief orientation teleconference that will be held in which participating agencies will be given instructions about the preparation needed for the one-day launch meeting. We'll then have that launch meeting, which is again in person. And as I mentioned earlier, during that meeting, teams will begin to develop their recruitment and retention plans, continue that development as they return to their organizations, and then shift towards implementation of the plans. We'll provide the ongoing technical assistance in this process. We do ask the teams to submit brief bi-monthly, meaning every other month, sort of reports. And change management team members participate in 3 90-minute virtual meetings over the course of the collaborative, where the teams share their strategies and interventions, talk about the progress they're making, any obstacles that they're encountering. And we also begin to talk about sustainability strategies for sustaining this workforce initiative in your organization once you have a change process underway. In terms of the content, organizations that participate in this meeting or in this process will learn a lot about identifying and clarifying specific recruitment and retention challenges and shaping specific goals. Probably most importantly is a thorough education in the best practices in recruitment and retention. These have been distilled in over the 15 years or so that we've been working on this problem in behavioral health. We'll provide some guidance about measuring recruitment and retention. We have a very specific template that we will provide to you for building a recruitment and retention plan, and provide you guidance about managing the change process and sustaining both your plans and your change over time. In general, we ask agencies to build 2 plans, one that is focused on recruitment and one that is focused on retention, in our belief that these 2 things sort of go hand in hand. At a minimum, organizations that participate in this process benefit from this structure. It prompts you to create a process within your organization to look systematically at your recruitment and retention issues and to systematically implement some information. You benefit not only from the information that I can provide around best practices that have been identified in our field, but you also benefit from the peer learning and peer sharing that happens as organizations share their practical experience in implementing best practices. The technical assistance that we provide includes very detailed review and feedback on the plans, not just the provision of general sort of strategies for you to consider. Our belief is that you can improve your workforce, including your recruitment and retention success, through a process that you might call continuous workforce improvement. It is a matter of looking at workforce issues over time and helping implement a set of strategies, evaluating their impact, refining your strategies, and continuously moving forward. It's akin to the notion of continuous quality improvement, which assumes that we don't fix quality or fix the workforce at any given point in time, but we engage in an ongoing process of improvement over time. As you enter this collaborative in late 2019, the time horizon for change around recruitment and retention is really over 2020 and 2021. Some strategies can lead to short-term changes, such as an increased number of applications. Other changes may take more time to play out, and you may see the fruits of your labor occur more towards 2021. So what do we expect? We expect something from the senior leader of your organization, which is a commitment to actively engage his or her organization in this process and ultimate responsibility for the follow-through on this initiative. The application involves a letter from your CEO or director that accompanies the formal application. The CEO has responsibility for appointment of the team members. We ask that he or she participate in the orientation teleconference and the final conference call. We ask that that person review and approve the recruitment and retention plans and provide ongoing support of the team and of the plan's implementation. For the change management team, they too are expected to participate in the orientation call. They're expected to, all of them, to participate in the one-day launch meeting in person. They are the lead on the development of the plans, securing approval internally for the plans, and beginning to implement the recruitment and retention plans. And then as we move forward, eventually focusing on the development of some sustainability strategies. They submit the brief bi-monthly reports, attend the 3 virtual 90-minute meetings with others, and complete a satisfaction survey towards the end of the call. So let me tell you a little bit about the application process. The request for applications, which included a description of this collaborative and the application, was previously released online. You can obtain this document at annapoliscoalition.org/collaborative. If you previously downloaded your RFA from the Adams board shortly after this project was announced, the version you downloaded may have been a PDF, and I would encourage you to go back to that site or go to the Annapolis Coalition site, where what are posted in both locations now is the Microsoft Word version. This will be very useful to you. The Adams site had a PDF initially, but we ask that you take the RFA, delete the first 6 pages of the Word version, and use the remaining pages for your application. This will be much easier for you than struggling with the PDF version. We ask in the application for some brief contact information. There are 4 simple yes or no eligibility questions, and then we ask for 4 narrative responses: an overview of your organization, a description of your recruitment and retention challenges, a brief description of what you've tried to address these 2 things previously, and we ask you to identify 2 obstacles to your organization's participation in this collaborative and how you might address those. We ask you to identify your proposed team members, and then to also obtain a letter from your CEO or your agency executive director. We've tried to make this application relatively simple, relatively brief, so as not to burden you too much in the application process. The application deadline is October 7th at 5 p.m., and this is a hard deadline, so please take note of that date and time. To submit your application, we ask you to scan the application pages and the letter from your senior leader as one PDF, submit it electronically by email, and make sure that your organization's name is both in the email and in the title of your scan submission. You will receive a confirmation of receipt from me within 48 hours. And if you do not receive such a confirmation, it is your obligation to follow up and make sure that your document was received. You would do that by sending me an email. Only applications that have received that, or organizations that have submitted an application that has been confirmed, can be assured that we have your application and that it is under review. I'd like to share with you one final thought. My colleagues and I, who have been working in this area of behavioral health workforce development for many years, came across this quote from E.B. White, famous author, and we fell in love with this. And it is, "I get up every day determined to both change the world and to have one hell of a time. Sometimes this makes planning my day difficult." For us, tackling workforce problems has led us to believe that there is much that can be done to be successful in this important work. And there's great collegiality and friendship that can be had as you work with your colleagues to tackle some of these workforce problems. And we like to have a little fun along the way as well, when we will do some of that during the virtual meeting when we gather in Cleveland on November 20th. So in a moment, I will end this presentation and see if there are any questions in the chat box. If you don't have access to the chat or question box and would like to pose a question, please send those questions again to me at this email address, and I will reply to them very shortly after receiving those questions. After this webinar, you will receive an email thanking you for attending. In that will be a button that says replay, and you can click on that button if you want to review a recording of this webinar. While I sent the slides to most of you last evening, some of those kicked back because of firewalls within your organization that said the file size was too large. If you go to the Annapolis Coalition page, Annapolis Coalition /collaborative, you'll not only find the RFA in its Word version, but you will also find a copy of the slides as well. So I am going to click to the chat and question box and see if anyone has a question. Again, this is your opportunity to list a question in the chat or question box that appears on your screen. And if you cannot access that, please feel free to email me and I will respond after the webinar. So IRIS has indicated that they are a small agency and asked whether one of the members can be the CEO. And the answer to that question is absolutely. I've actually found that while this does not happen often, organizations where the CEO participates tend to be among those that are most successful at using this process because the top decision maker is in the room learning about the strategies and working with the team to implement them. So again, this is not an expectation. It does enhance your application to have someone so senior there, and it's quite fine as a strategy. Are there any other questions? So the question is, what email address is to be used to submit applications? All of your questions, all of the application submission comes to me at michael.hoge, and that's H-O-G-E, at yale.edu. And you will find that printed in the RFA. You can get the sort of exact email address there. While we're waiting to see if there are any other questions, give you just a couple examples of some of the strategies that we will be discussing during the virtual meeting. Some of these are quite basic, starting with the notion of job descriptions. In behavioral health, it is common for employer organizations to actually create job titles and job descriptions. We are not an industry where a lot of that has been standardized. And job descriptions that are unclear have actually led to a lot of problems in organizations advertising. In many cases, in larger organizations, larger behavioral health organizations, there are multiple job descriptions for essentially the same organization without much effort across the organization to share applicants if the program that received an application doesn't have an opening, but perhaps another part of the organization does. So this is an area that some organizations have focused on. Other strategies involve discussing targeted strategies for advertising positions. And then looking on the retention side, some of the participating organizations in this collaborative have focused on the notion of stay interviews. So these are not exit interviews, but stay interviews involve interviewing current workers to get a sense of their satisfaction with the organization, some sense of whether they're looking at other job opportunities, an idea of the things that would lead to them being more satisfied. The concept of stay interviews as opposed to exit interviews when someone's already committed to leave is to look at how you can intervene really midstream and retain employees. We have another question from Nelson, which says as a CEO, he would be a team member, however, would be out of town on vacation and can't attend the orientation. How should we treat this? If you have someone in your organization that you think is really essential to be on the team, and they cannot participate in one element of the learning collaborative, you should simply note that in your application. The orientation webinar is relatively brief and something that others could cover. I would say the biggest problem is if a core team member cannot participate in the day-long virtual meeting. But whatever the conflict, please list that in advance and we'll take that into consideration. Gladys asks, since this addresses behavioral health, is there the need for the behavioral health heart department head to join the orientation? We do ask a senior leader to participate in the orientation meeting and the final virtual meeting, and it's really to your organization to, up to your organization to decide what you would define as the most appropriate person to be in that room. If there is a larger organization and a behavioral health division, then the senior person of that division might be appropriate. It's also possible to have more than the team plus one participate in the orientation webinar. We do, however, restrict the teams and participation in the day-long meeting to 3 members per team to maintain equity and to deal with sort of space issues. You can, however, create a process within your organization where as your team comes back, your 3-member team comes back from the day-long virtual launch meeting and engages other people in the planning process. That in some ways is really ideal. Wait just one more minute to see if there are any other questions. Seeing no others, I think we will conclude. Again, if you have questions about the collaborative process, if you have questions about your organization's eligibility, please email me. This collaborative in Cuyahoga County will be the 3rd that we have launched. We've completed a collaborative in the state of Maryland, and there is an ongoing collaborative in Ohio that has been sponsored by the Great Lakes Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. The feedback from participants has been very positive, and we look forward to the possibility of working with you in this next Woodruff Foundation sponsored event. Thank you so much.